In April 2024, something unusual happened in the Philippines. American troops quietly deployed a weapons system that hadn't been seen in decades. The Typhon mid-range capability, missile launcher, land-based, mobile, capable of striking targets over 1,000 miles away. China immediately protested, called it destabilizing, demanded its removal, and for months, it sat there during joint military exercises. A silent but powerful statement about American presence in the Indo-Pacific. Then Japan made a move that stunned defense analysts around the world. After initial discussions about hosting similar systems on Japanese soil, Tokyo quietly backed away. The deployment was postponed indefinitely. Some called it pragmatic diplomacy. Others called it capitulation. But the question everyone's asking is the same. Did Japan just make a brilliant strategic calculation, or did it blink when China turned up the pressure? This is the story of the Typhon Withdrawal. What it reveals about Japan's defense posture, and why this decision might reshape the balance of power in Asia for decades to come. Let's start with what the Typhon actually is, because if you don't understand the weapon, you can't understand why its deployment or lack thereof matters so much. The Typhon mid-range capability system is essentially a mobile missile launcher that can fire two types of missiles. The SM-6, which has a range of around 290 miles and is primarily used for air and missile defense, and the Tomahawk, a cruise missile that can strike targets over 1,000 miles away with precision. Here's why that's significant. For nearly 3 decades, the United States was prohibited from developing or deploying ground-based missiles with ranges between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. This was because of a treaty signed in 1987 with the Soviet Union called the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, or INF Treaty. The treaty worked well during the Cold War. Both superpowers dismantled their intermediate-range missiles. Europe breathed easier. The risk of a quick-strike nuclear war in the European theater decreased significantly. But there was a problem. China wasn't part of the treaty. And while the United States and Russia were bound by these restrictions, China spent the last 30 years building up a massive arsenal of precisely the kinds of missiles the treaty banned. By 2019, the Pentagon estimated that China had over 2,000 ground-based intermediate-range missiles. The United States had 0, not because American engineers couldn't build them, but because a treaty signed decades earlier prohibited it. In 2019, the United States withdrew from the INF Treaty, citing Russian violations and the need to counter China's missile buildup. Suddenly, the US military was free to develop and deploy land-based intermediate-range systems again. Enter the Typhon, developed rapidly, tested in 2023, and deployed to the Philippines in early 2024 during the Salaknib joint military exercises. It was a clear signal. America was back in the intermediate-range missile game, and it was positioning assets within striking distance of China's coast. Now, Japan's role in all this. Japan hosts more American military personnel than any other foreign country. Over 50,000 troops, dozens of bases. The US-Japan alliance is the cornerstone of American strategy in Asia. So when the Typhon appeared in the Philippines, defense planners in both Washington and Tokyo began quiet discussions. Could Japan host similar systems? Would it be willing to station American intermediate-range missiles on its soil? The strategic logic was clear. Japan's southern islands, particularly Okinawa and the Ryukyu chain, sit less than 400 miles from Taiwan. If conflict erupted over Taiwan, having long-range strike capabilities positioned on Japanese territory would give the United States and its allies a significant advantage. But then something changed. In late 2024, Japanese officials began signaling hesitation. Publicly, they emphasized diplomatic engagement with China. Privately, sources indicated concern about becoming a target, about provoking Beijing, and about the domestic political backlash. By early 2025, the deployment was quietly shelved. No official announcement. No dramatic press conference. Just a bureaucratic decision to delay indefinitely. China's foreign ministry praised the decision as a step toward regional stability. American defense hawks called it a dangerous precedent. And analysts around the world asked the same question. What just happened? To understand Japan's decision, you need to understand the pressure it's been under, because this wasn't just about missiles. It was about decades of strategic anxiety colliding with new geopolitical realities. Japan's constitution, written after World War II under American occupation, famously renounces war as a sovereign right. Article 9 states that Japan will never maintain land, sea, or air forces. Of course, Japan does maintain a military, rebranded as the Self-Defense Forces, but the constitutional ambiguity has shaped Japanese defense policy for 70 years. For decades, Japan relied almost entirely on the United States for its security. The U.S.-Japan Security Treaty meant American forces would defend Japan in case of attack. In return, Japan provided bases, funding, and political support. But that arrangement is showing cracks. China's military has grown exponentially. Its navy is now the largest in the world by ship count. Its air force is modernizing rapidly. And its missile arsenal dwarfs anything Japan or the United States can field in the region. Taiwan is the flashpoint. If China moves on Taiwan, Japan cannot stay neutral. American forces would launch from Japanese bases, Japanese airspace would be critical, and Japan's southern islands would likely be targeted. This puts Tokyo in an impossible position. If it hosts American offensive missile systems, it becomes a primary target in any Taiwan conflict. But if it refuses, it weakens the alliance that guarantees its security and signals that it can be pressured by Beijing. So what drove the decision to back down on Typhon? Several factors, and they're not all military. First, domestic politics. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party is facing increasing public skepticism about military expansion, while polls show growing concern about China. There's also deep unease about Japan becoming a frontline state in a US-China confrontation. Hosting American offensive missiles is a step beyond traditional defense cooperation. It's not just allowing US forces on Japanese soil. It's explicitly enabling strikes against Chinese territory. That's a political minefield. Second, economic considerations. China is Japan's largest trading partner. Billions of dollars in trade flow between the two countries every year. Japanese companies have massive investments in China. Automakers, electronics firms, manufacturing supply chains, all deeply integrated. Provoking Beijing risks economic retaliation. China has shown willingness to use economic coercion against countries that displease it. South Korea faced Chinese boycotts after deploying THAAD missile defense. Australia saw tariffs and trade restrictions after calling for a COVID inquiry. Japan's economy, already struggling with slow growth and demographic decline, cannot afford a prolonged economic conflict with its largest trading partner. Third, diplomatic strategy. Japan has been pursuing a delicate balancing act. It wants to strengthen its alliance with the United States, but it also wants to keep channels open with China. Rejecting Typhon deployment gives Tokyo a diplomatic win with Beijing without completely abandoning its security commitments to Washington. Some analysts argue this is smart triangulation. Japan shows restraint on offensive systems while continuing to build up its own defensive capabilities. It avoids becoming a lightning rod while still contributing to regional deterrence. Others see capitulation, a sign that when Beijing applies pressure, Tokyo will fold. And that perception, they argue, is more dangerous than the missiles themselves. So is this decision smart strategy or dangerous weakness? Let's examine both sides. The case for smart strategy goes like this. Japan avoided an unnecessary escalation. Hosting Typhon missiles would have provoked China without fundamentally changing the strategic balance. The United States already has overwhelming strike capability from naval and air assets. Adding ground-based missiles in Japan would be symbolically provocative, but operationally redundant. Moreover, Japan is investing heavily in its own military capabilities. It recently announced plans to double defense spending to 2% of GDP. It's acquiring Tomahawk missiles for its own forces. It's building up its Navy and Air Force. And it's strengthening security partnerships with Australia, India, and Southeast Asian nations. From this perspective, Rejecting Typhon deployment is a tactical concession that preserves strategic flexibility. Japan continues to strengthen itself and its alliances without handing China a propaganda victory or justifying further Chinese military expansion. The case for dangerous weakness, however, is equally compelling. It argues that Japan just taught China a valuable lesson: apply pressure, and Tokyo will back down. This sets a precedent that could embolden Beijing on other issues. If Japan won't host missiles, will it support Taiwan in a crisis? Will it allow US forces to operate from Japanese bases in wartime? Will it stand firm on disputed territories like the Senkaku Islands? China is watching these signals carefully. Every time a US ally hesitates, Beijing's calculus shifts. Deterrence relies on credibility. If allies appear unreliable or easily intimidated, deterrence weakens. Furthermore, critics argue that Japan's decision undermines the broader US strategy in the Indo-Pacific. The whole point of distributing capabilities across allied nations is to complicate Chinese targeting and demonstrate alliance cohesion. When a key ally opts out, it creates gaps that China can exploit. There's also the question of what message this sends to other American allies. If Japan, the most important US partner in Asia, won't host these systems, why would the Philippines continue? Why would South Korea take the risk? The credibility of American extended deterrence depends on allies being willing to share the burden and the risk. So where does this leave us? Japan's Typhon decision is not happening in isolation. It's part of a broader recalibration of Asian security dynamics. The United States is trying to build a network of partnerships to counter China. The Quad with Japan, India, and Australia. AUKUS with Australia and the UK. Enhanced cooperation with the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia. But this network is fragile. Each country has its own threat perceptions, domestic politics, and economic interests. Expecting all of them to align perfectly with American strategy is unrealistic. Japan's decision reflects this complexity. Tokyo wants security, but it also wants stability. It wants to deter China, but it doesn't want to provoke a crisis. It values the American alliance, but it also needs economic engagement with Beijing. This is the tightrope Japan is trying to walk. And the Typhon decision suggests Tokyo believes, at least for now, that restraint serves its interests better than confrontation. But restraint has limits. If China continues its military buildup, if tensions over Taiwan escalate, if North Korea becomes more aggressive, Japan may find that avoiding decisions today only makes harder decisions inevitable tomorrow. The irony is that Japan's caution might actually encourage the very behavior it hopes to avoid. If Beijing interprets Japanese hesitation as weakness, it may push harder, test boundaries more aggressively, and create the crisis that Tokyo desperately wants to prevent. Deterrence is paradoxical. Sometimes the best way to avoid war is to prepare visibly for it, to show potential adversaries that aggression will be met with overwhelming response. Japan's decision to step back from Typhon deployment might be read by China not as wisdom, but as an invitation to push further. The coming months will be critical. How China responds to Japan's decision will tell us a lot. Does Beijing see this as an opportunity to press other demands? Or does it reciprocate with restraint? And how does the United States react? Does Washington accept Japan's decision and adapt its strategy? Or does it increase pressure on Tokyo to take a harder line? The broader question is what kind of security architecture Asia will have in the coming decades. Will it be based on balance of power, with clear deterrence and military presence? Or will it be based on accommodation, with countries trying to manage China's rise through diplomacy and economic engagement? Japan's Typhon decision suggests Tokyo is betting on a hybrid approach, strong enough to deter, but not so provocative as to make conflict inevitable. Whether that's brilliant strategy or wishful thinking remains to be seen. What's certain is this: the choices Japan makes in the next few years will shape not just its own security, but the stability of the entire Indo-Pacific region. And in a world where great power competition is intensifying, there are no risk-free options. Japan didn't back down because it's weak. It backed down because it's caught between two futures, one where it becomes a frontline state in a new Cold War, and one where it manages to preserve security, prosperity, and peace through careful balancing. The Typhon Withdrawal is a bet that the second future is still possible. Time will tell if that bet pays off or if Japan just delayed a reckoning that's coming either way. The missiles may be gone, but the questions remain. And in geopolitics, unanswered questions are often more dangerous than the weapons themselves.